Oh, there it goes. There it goes. Ah, ha, ha, ha. I have a Focusrite Claret, a USB audio device, and every like 2 or 3 days it needs to be rebooted. I should probably check to see if there's a firmware upgrade or something available for it. G Surgeon, Amsterdam, Netherlands, representing the sweatshirt today. Howdy, Benjamin, Jan, Jim Van Allen. Good, lots of folks popping in. Good morning. So today I'll do an open questions. Ian says, yeah, they have good preamps. I wanted like a DPA defined microphone, so I wanted a really good preamp, and then like I had a Focusrite Claret in it, or Focusrite Scarlet, and I thought it was broken, so I got the Claret just because I thought it was better. Mr. Hutmacher, good to see you. Greg, good morning to see you again as well. So I'm doing open questions and answers today. I was going to originally code first responder kit stuff, but I'm caught up on my pull request. So I've got one pull request outstanding, but the developer needs to change their queries. It has problems with the queries. Can't remember exactly what it was, but I'm all caught up on pull requests, which means I'm probably going to do a release for this weekend. Probably going to do a release for the first responder kit. Plus, I try to use the first responder kit during my teaching, and I taught the mastering server tuning class Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and I used the latest development versions of the first responder kit throughout. And I didn't run into any problems, so I'm like, yeah, I'll probably ship an update to it this weekend. This is my first weekend off in, I think, weeks. I'm really happy with that. I set, Bob, I'll copy that in on the chat, and then you put that in for one of the messages that we'll keep. Jim says road trip. Yes, you are absolutely right. So let me go add that to the list of cues there. Kevlar says, are you going to go drive helmet? Yes. I have a little part that I got to go put in helmet. There's a part that you can get that when you touch the remote control a certain way, when like you hit it a certain number of things, the target top will just pop off as you're walking up to it. The target top takes like 20 seconds to drop all the way off. If you've never seen a 911 Targa before, it's a fully automated robotic top, and it's a beautiful dance to watch, but it's so much more fun to see it from outside the car. So I've got this part where you can do it from the remote control, a still factory remote control and everything. I don't have to change anything. So I just got to put that part in, and then I'll go ripping around. Then we won't be doing a road trip too far because I have to teach a class. I have consulting Monday, Tuesday. I have to teach a class like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but then we're off for a week in Malibu. We're going to go drive up the coast and hang out there. Oh, Surly Deb, you're in. Oh, I just went to go copy paste that. Good to see you, Surly Deb. Dejan, good to see you as well there. What else there was another thing that was in there around the weekend type question. So yeah, no, that's it. So feel free to get your questions in. Those of you who are watching on YouTube, it's actually easier if you watch on Twitch. If you go over to my Twitch channel, just search for Brento's R Twitch, and then you can put your questions in there, and they'll go automatically into a queue. Why have a dog and bark yourself? That's funny. All right, so several good questions coming in already. Oh, Surly Dev, your picture there, your avatar was kind of cute. That was adorable. I'm having some slight espresso problems. I'm red-green colorblind, which is why you'll often see me wear things that are either black or gray or shades of gray. Well, we use Nespresso coffee, and I have 2 colors of coffee right now that are confusing me. Oh, that's cute. Oh, that's adorable. 2 colors of coffee that are confusing me. One is like the maximum caffeine that you can get in an espresso, and the other is decaf. And to me, they look like the same color, so I'm always like, I hope I got the right one, because it would be disappointing if I did not have the right one. So we got a bunch of questions. Let's go in and go get started. Let's see what we've got here. And if you want, Surly Deb, we'll do this. If you want to queue them up, you can queue them, but then I'll go throw them on the screen whenever they're ready, so that way a Reviveri R plate? I don't even know what that is. Is that the electronic license plates? I bet that's the electronic license plates. If that's the paper, the e-paper license plates, I have looked at those. They were just like $500. It was kind of crazy. Okay, so let's see here. I'll go through the first. He says, yep. First question, I'd love to know the story behind SPallnightlog, and it's SPallnightlog, not long. That was a little play on words there. Script inside the first responder kit, and if it's still being used today. So what it was I had a company that needed to build something like Azure SQLDB, but they needed to manage it themselves because Azure SQLDB had a bunch of problems where it wasn't really compatible with their applications. So this company was Kcura Relativity, and I made a deal with the owner of Kcura Relativity, the guy who owns the company, Andrew Seja, is brilliant. I love working with him. He hires smart people. I love being around his teams. It was just totally fun. And I was in Chicago at the time. And I was like, look, I'll make you an offer you can't refuse financially for me to go develop this if I can go do it open source. So it's a log shipping script that will just go and do automated log shipping at scale. So that was why we built that. And Eric Darling and I parachuted into their offices for, I don't know, like a month straight. So I had a desk. I had a desk in an office, which was kind of cool. I had a little badge and everything, so I could go in. It was embedded in the team. That was kind of fun. So we did that project, and then I ended up rotating out of there, and they ended up doing something different. I want to say they built a C# app in order to solve the same problem. And so I don't know how many people are using SPallnightlog these days. I don't use it because I don't have to manage any production database servers now. I really just parachute in as a consultant and fix emergency performance problems. So I don't use it. Every now and then we get a pull request or two for it, but it's very rare. I don't think it's used that often. I'd be surprised if there are 10, 20, 30 companies around the world that are using it today. Next up, let's see here. We have Jason says, good morning. What are some options for syncing two tables across servers? I am a really big fan of, as soon as you have any kind of data syncing going between two places, I get the BI team involved. Because the business intelligence team at your company, usually we're used to moving data between one place and another. And they're used to using ETL tools, things like SSIS, Azure Data Factory. And they're just professionals at this, at detecting changes. I would rather assign it to that team because they're just pros at doing that kind of thing. If you didn't have any business intelligence teams at all, you didn't have anybody who was used to building a data warehouse or moving data from one place to another, the first thing I would ask is this mission critical if the data is wrong every now and then? Like if I do a bad job of change detection, are people's lives going to be at risk, or are we going to lose money as a company, or is this just like a convenience thing? I would go drilling down way deeper into that, because the last thing that I want to go do is doing things like linked server queries on an agent job schedule. Stuff breaks all the time, and you're basically building technical debt. So go find the BI team. Let's see here. Contact Administrator says, could you please suggest a tool that can store query execution plans before and after for comparison? The tool, I don't know that I would suggest a tool for that. SentryOne Plan Explorer has a little bit of those functionalities. I just wouldn't recommend a tool for that. Just save them. Just save the execution plan. Execution plans are real easy to save to disk, so it's not that challenging. Now, if you want to compare two execution plans, there's a tool built into SQL Server Management Studio to do it, compare show plans. It's pretty crappy. The only one that I know out on the market is SentryOne Plan Explorer, but even that kind of hits a wall when you're comparing two execution plans, because the plans can be so different, plus you can have a stored proc with a whole bunch of statements. So I just haven't seen a good solution to that problem. Next up, representing the Netherlands, we have G-Surgeon. In our database project, we got quite a few views which are probably obsolete and certainly not used by stored procedures, but in Excel. Ooh. Is there a graceful way to determine if a view has been used by any user? Oh, that's such a cool question. because the view won't show up in the execution plan directly. Like you can query the plan cache and you won't necessarily see the view. I'm always thinking of edge cases, problems where it won't work. And the classic example is a query that's long and a bunch of the query gets trimmed out and doesn't show up in the execution plan. Same thing with the plan cache. You can see a lot, or system exec query SQL text, things like that. You can miss things inside there. They'll blow out of there quickly because your plan cache is under pressure. So there's not a bulletproof way, but you could start by searching for sysdm exec SQL text, I think it is, or anything that involves the plan cache will get you joins over to that DMV, and you could go search for that. We're looking for anyone where their query contains that. It's going to be CPU intensive. It's going to take a while. The plan cache is going to roll through relatively quickly, depending on your server, but that would be your only place to go and get started, unfortunately. Next up, from over on YouTube, Checkmate99 says, I just recently started following, and I was curious if there are any updates to the Power BI dashboard for the kit. No, I stopped supporting that, actually, because it was such a giant pain in the rear to do Power BI desktop support. I like Power BI. I like the Power BI desktop. I think the service is really cool, but doing support for it, oh hell no. I could go the rest of my life and never hear questions like, how do I connect to this data source? Can you change this color from red to green? Can you move this table 5 pixels to the right? No. So I got sick and tired of doing support kind of questions like that. Why can't I connect to Power BI? Why can't I connect to the server? So I'm just like, screw it. I still believe in the Power BI dashboard for DBAs. I just don't have the time to do support for it. So I left it as open source. It's kind of abandonware. And I'm like, if you want to use it, go ahead. You can make improvements to it, whatever. Someone's welcome to take it over to run it as an open source project, but also Power BI files don't work in GitHub worth a damn because they're like one big ginormous file. So it's like, for me, it was a neat experiment, but then I decided it's just not where I want to go with my career. Next up, this is Guarav says, is it possible that the deadlock graph can show the wrong detail? I have no idea. Unfortunately, I have no idea. It's a great question. What I would do is I would post the deadlock graph over at dba.stackexchange.com. dba.stackexchange.com will let you ask questions and answers. Post it over there, and then you may be able to find someone who can find something that's broken inside that deadlock graph. I don't know off the top of my head, though. Next up, from over on YouTube, Balaji says, what's your opinion about using Windows storage replication and always-on failover clustering environments in EC2 to overcome some limitations? So here's the thing. When you move to the cloud, there's a saying in the cloud, treat your servers like cattle, not like pets. Treat your servers like cattle, not like pets. What that means is you should expect them to die. They're going to die all the time. You're going to have a herd of them. You're not going to try to teach them tricks by hand. You're not going to develop deep emotional connections with them. Back up your data, not your servers. So instead of thinking about, I got to protect this server at all costs, think about how I'm going to protect this data at all costs. Do backups, do SQL Server native backups over to, say, Azure Blob Storage. You're in AWS. To EC2 or to S3, you do backups to S3. S3 is beautifully replicated all over the place. Then you use tools like SPallnightlog to continuously restore those backups on other servers. But no way in hell, no way in heaven or hell would I use Windows storage replication in the year 2020 in the cloud. That's what AWS S3 is for. Or the other service that you're missing is Amazon FSx. I'm going to go pull it up on the screen. So if I go fire open a browser and go to search for Amazon FSX, because this thing isn't very easy to find. Not a lot of people will stumble across this. Amazon has this weird thing with their naming conventions. But FSX is managed file service storage, where they manage the storage for you. You don't want to be doing more sysadmin type tasks in the year 2020. This is just so much more scalable and spins out much bigger. All right, so that's that one. Let's come back over. Oh, I should give a shout out to this week's sponsor. This week's webcasts are brought to you by Idera. They have a webcast coming up on, I believe it's September 16th. I believe it's this Wednesday. Totally free webcast with things about database administration, query tuning, the cloud, if I remember right, Azure Data Factory. It's an entire day of webcasts that is entirely free over at brentozar.com/go/Idera live. So you can register for it, go get your learn on. I will not be teaching anything for free I might be teaching something for free this week. I'm not over there at Idera Live. I might do something randomly in terms of streaming. Okay, next up, let's see here. Let's go back over to this one. And then SQLDevDBA says, hit up Guy in a Cube on YouTube. Their channel has great videos that will get you going on Power BI. Yeah, by all means, other people are welcome to go do that kind of thing. I'm not reinventing that wheel, though. Just not going to happen for me. Next up, let's see here. We have... Over on YouTube, Brian says, I'm protecting always-on availability groups. We're using Azure Backup for SQL IaaS. In general, is it possible to do a full VM restore? So this is where you treat your servers like cattle, not like pets. Never, ever, 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 ever restore a server in the cloud, ever. Just an incredibly bad idea. Instead, think about anything that would make you want to restore a server. Somebody probably screwed something up and fat-fingered something. Treat that server as if it's dead to you. You don't want to have anything to do with that server. All right, next up, Jose says over on YouTube, good morning, what's your opinion of ERD software? And he means enterprise, database diagramming software. Many developers don't know or don't like to use it. I found those tools very useful. Generally, the problem with that stuff is it tends to be expensive. So like the Irwin and ER Studio type applications, they tend to be like $1,000 and up. And a lot of people are cheap. A lot of people won't even write documentation if the tools involved are free, let alone they're not going to spend money on it. So that's why you don't tend to see a lot of people doing it. Plus, a lot of tools don't do a great job of round tripping. Like what they'll do is they'll help you do the initial database design, put it into production, but then developers continue to change the database schema, and they don't do it in the ERD tool. So then someone opens up the ERD, the database diagram, it's way out of date. So then they try to sync the database diagram with the existing tables, and all hell breaks loose. So I haven't seen a lot of people willing to put the time in to do that well. I know people like enterprises do it, like people who have hundreds of developers. It's really common there. But when you're only in teams of like 1 to 100 developers, it's pretty rare to have an accurate, up-to-date database diagram. I'm not saying that's right. You could say it's the shame, but you know, it is what it is. It costs money. People don't want to spend money these days. Next up, let's see here. Elgady says, business rules must be written in stored procedures or code. Yes, that's true. Must be written in stored procedures or code. It's true. Next up, we have... Aren't I a jerk? Flavia says, hi, I'm struggling with writing queries to import Excel files without using TS, or probably meaning DTS. Yeah, you don't want to do that with queries. If you're going to import data in and out of SQL Server, what you want to use is an ETL tool. The tool that you're looking for is ETL, extract, transform, and load. It's going to extract the data from Excel, transform it in some way to match your database, and then load it into the database server. You'll also sometimes hear people say ELT, extract, load, and transform. So sometimes you do it in different orders. The most common ones out there in our industry, in the Microsoft world, are either SSIS, SQL Server Integration Services, or Azure Data Factory. SSIS is still the big monster in the industry. Azure Data Factory is like the new hotness. So start with either of those. G. Donfrio says BCP. Yes, if you want to hang out with a bunch of neckbeards who are really old and don't really say friendly things out there, then by all means, BCP, very cool. Giant pain in the rear. Faraz says, how do you make the decision whether to use integers for a data field in SQL Server? What are the cons between integers versus strings? So I don't usually have to make that decision because people hardly ever pay me to write code. People usually tell me to fix code. They'll say, here, come in, you have this really slow performing query, we want to make it go faster. And I'm not allowed to change the entire data model. Like that's just something that's dreadful for the business. If they have to change the data model, it can break all kinds of queries. So that I don't usually have to do that much. Basically, it comes down to, if you're putting numbers in there, you should use integers. If you're putting strings in there, you should use like varchar and varchar. It's really not that much more complex for that. Kevlar points out that leading zeros is a big driver for that. This is me just as a SQL Server person. Leading zeros are the Antichrist. I don't want to consider those data, but if you really leading zeros are important to you, then absolutely you want strings there. Next up, J. Cole says, in SQL Server table creation, can ordinal positioning by cardinality impact query performance? Ordinal positioning by cardinality? You meaning like which tables you put or which columns you put in the table first? No. I'm trying to think. There's an edge case around nullable and not nullable fields, but it's like a super rare edge case. Otherwise, no. I would never see a situation where I needed to reorder columns in a table to make it perform better. Next up, El Rusti on YouTube says, I have a database with recovery model simple, but my log size is big. It's bigger than the data file. What can cause this? Oh, classic example. Begin tran and then walk out and leave for the weekend. Classic example where someone's starting a transaction and not committing it. That is the number one hassle for it. Another example is when someone does something big, like they rebuild a whole bunch of tables inside one transaction, that your log file can become pretty large there as well. Next up, boy, I'm glad I didn't try to do live coding on this one. Y'all are question crazy. Dejan asks, what's your opinion? Migrate SQL Server to a new version versus remove. So for me, anytime I'm changing versions, I want to go build a brand new environment from scratch. I want to go build my brand new environment and test the hell out of it. I want to do failovers back and forth. I want to test that I can do how fast my restores go, how fast my checkDB goes. Usually for that, then, I want to build it in a standalone, totally separate environment that doesn't talk to anything else. I'm not saying it has to be firewalled off. I just don't want to do it in an existing cluster. So that way, I can be absolutely confident when I go live with that thing that it's going to be bulletproof. My idea of success when I build a new server or cluster is not to have to touch it again for 3 years. I want to beat the hell out of it before it goes live, but then once it's gone live, I want to be able to walk away from it for 3 solid years. I don't want to have to fix anything. Sure, I'll do patching, but I don't want to have to worry that that thing is going to go bump in the night without me. Because after all, I got enough unreliable servers already. The goal of this is to put in things that are more reliable now instead of less reliable. Next up, Turbo Guru. That's kind of spiffy. I like that. Turbo Guru says, after 15 years of .NET development and working with SQL Server, I want to pivot my career towards SQL Server. Is the move from developer to data engineer or DBA a common path? Yes. So developer, so I'm going to show you, I'm going to get a slide deck. I'm going to get a slide out of something that I have to show my customers all the time. Because it just comes up all the time when people are starting to do training. Let's move this over here and get it as close as I can to the display. So let's see here, that, and move this over here just a little bit. Yeah, that's probably good enough. Okay, so going down the left-hand side are the list of job duties that are involved with working with databases. Developers generally come from the top and work down. Developers start by writing T-SQL, writing C# code, putting data in and out of databases. Then gradually over time, they move towards designing indexes. Usually when you're a full-time developer, you don't get to the point where you're designing indexes for existing tables. You just kind of throw a dart in the dark and pray. They don't really do a great job of monitoring performance either. Production DBAs come from the sysadmin side. They're used to installing Windows, building clusters, configuring stuff in the cloud. They come from the bottom and work up. So eventually, sysadmins come into database administration from here, and they start by doing production DBA work. Developers come into the database administration world by way of knowing T-SQL, and they generally become more development DBAs. You'll often hear people go, look at this chart and say things like, I do all of that. Yeah, you suck at all of that. Eventually, if you're going to make good money, you need to start to specialize into one of these columns and really focus in on your skill sets. It's kind of like people who claim that they're a full stack musician, where they're like, oh yeah, I play the entire orchestra myself. I walk around on street corners and, bang the drums. And U2 is not hiring you to be an opening act. Grimes is not going to feature you on her record. Now, Grimes to some extent is a full stack musician, but Grimes doesn't play all of these instruments. She's actually an interesting counterpoint to that. So this is a solo act. When you think about real hardcore musicians, hardcore is probably the wrong term to use there. It's not like it's a metal thing. But this is a band. This is a group of specific specialists who've dove deeply into specific instruments, and they do one or two things really well. That's why I say that you end up specializing into one of these columns to really do a good job. Okay, let's come back over here and then close this guy, come back over to this. Contact Administrator asks, what metrics should I collect for daily monitoring reports for an Azure database? In the year 2020, you should not be building a monitoring tool. Go buy one. And I know you're like, oh no, but wait, I'll build one myself out of lint and cheese and leftover Pringles. Yours is going to suck. Let me tell you what your future looks like. You're going to start collecting some random metrics. Then you're going to have a failure or a performance outage, and you're going to go Google to find out what caused it, and you're going to learn about a new metric. Oh, I had no idea I had to monitor AG redo log queue rate, some wacko metric. Same thing with Azure. You still have to monitor all kinds of query performance metrics. Next thing, a friend of mine, I say friend, there's a blogger out there who's just blogged this month that you still should be monitoring page life expectancy in the year 2020. I'm like, oh my God, your skills are so far out of date, it's not even funny. So you're always in this race if you try to build your own monitoring tools. You're always in this race to go up against the monitoring vendors who have to collect every single kind of data, all kinds of interesting diagnostic stuff. Just go buy a tool. They cost like $1,000 and they'll monitor all kinds of things. Go buy one. Don't try to reinvent your own. If you're going to try and reinvent your own, go get one of the open source ones like Stack Overflow's. I forget what it's called. Somebody's going to know. They're going to put it inside there. So we'll go from there. Ivory says, I'm sorry to ask this. Okay, well, all right. Well, we don't have to answer it. I mean, I can't seem to figure out why I don't see the actual time elapsed in my actual plan. You're on an old version of SQL Server. Get to a newer version of SQL Server. Just get to a newer one. That'll do it. Let's see here. Next up. Spallnightlog says, how could you tell about user managed keys and user managed certificates in TDE? I actually don't do any security work at all. I don't do any security encryption compliance work whatsoever. It's actually excluded by my contract. What you'll want to do is go hit Books Online. Just go hit Books Online. There's tons of detailed information on there about how to use those features. Next up, Smooth for Prez says, any tools or recommendations or best practices for converting Crystal reports to SSRS? No, I haven't worked with reporting stuff in 15 years probably, because I don't ever want to go back to the point in my career where someone was saying, can you move this bar 3 pixels to the right? Can you make this Arial instead of Helvetica? You know, like that's my idea of hell. So I don't go anywhere near that. No answers on that. I'm not saying it's a bad career. It's just, it was bad for me. I don't want to deal with that kind of crap. Same reason I couldn't become an accountant. When I was in high school, flashback, I actually used to think I wanted to become an accountant. I thought that I wanted to learn accounting and economics, and I was going to go over to Germany as the Berlin Wall was falling, and I was going to go teach them about capitalism and accounting and economics. It didn't take one single accounting class before I was like, 3-4 weeks in, and I'm like, oh no, thank you. I am not interested in that newsletter. I could spend the rest of my life not wanting to deal with balancing pennies. If something's off by $500, you know what? Just put an entry in the accounting books and call it a day. I don't give a damn. Which is also why when we started a small business, one of the first things that we did was go hire an accountant, because I'm like, I don't want to do that. Someone else can go file the taxes for me. Thank you. Let's see here. Next up, Jan says, do you plan to add an option for exporting results from SpBlitz to Excel? No. You could, though. Oh, that's right. It's open source. If you wanted that, you could go add that. I don't have any plans to do that, though. If you wanted to check in a pull request, by all means, there's like a dozen contributors in this month's version of the First Responder Kit. You're totally welcome to do that kind of coding if it's something interesting to you. People will sometimes go, hey, Brent, can you just go code this for me, please? And I'm like, oh, would you look at the time? I would like to go get drunk. And I'm not going to do that work. Jackie says, speaking of importing data, when you use the SQL Server inbuilt operations, so I don't use SQL Server's inbuilt operations. Those are stuff that are designed as like a set of training wheels, and they don't improve those things ever. Go use an ETL tool, extract, transform, load, like SSIS or Azure Data Factory. That's where you're going to go and have the most success importing files. Just because you can use a hammer in order to pound in nails doesn't mean that you can use it to screw things in. Go find the right tool for the job. Wasn't a great analogy. Oh well, it isn't. Darren Davis says, non-SQL question, how do you like your new Keytron keyboard? I love it. It's so fantastic. I wish that it wasn't so thick. This thing is really thick, and Richie warned me about this when he went and bought his. So it's so thick that you have to have like a wrist rest next to it, and I'm not really a fan of wrist rests. I like a really smooth desk. Like I don't want anything on my desk at all. Yeah, I love it. It's really nice. The only drawback is I'm on my third set of key switches now, and they're really loud. This set is really loud, so now I'm on getting a set of O-rings. I have a set of O-rings in the kitchen, and I got to go install them in here to make it quieter. But I love it. It's fantastic. It's very nice. Okay, so if I was going to say one thing that was a little weird, it's got a USB-C cable on one side, but not on the other, and I'm super anal retentive with my desk. I really wish they were on both sides, because I don't have a USB cable over on the left side of the thing. That's it, though. But they have several different layouts that are fantastic. Works great with Bluetooth. Absolutely fantastic. Next up, Jared says, what about putting a DAC in to keep track of changes for indexes, schemas, and stored procedures? What about it? Next up, we have Porangosus says, is there something like do this for each weight type? Something like if page IO latch, then search for read-intensive queries for each weight type? Absolutely there is. There are training classes from Parentos are Unlimited. We offer a 3-day class called Mastering Server Tuning. And in that Mastering Server Tuning class, I give you the most common weight types, show you what causes each of them, and then walk you through correcting them. You get hands-on labs so you can demonstrate your expertise, show to your boss that you know how to solve the most common weight types. That is the class Mastering Server Tuning from Brentos are Unlimited, coming soon to a screen near you. Enjoy. Will G. Dionfrio says, do you use a Craigslist? Do you use that old voice in the class? I don't, and I probably should. I'm always looking for different voices to use, and I don't have that voice for anything. That seems like such an interesting voice. Like maybe I don't know, I could use it for Query Store, maybe. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you about the queries that are high in terms of your resources. But G. Donfrio says, I'm sure I'm screwing that name up, and I shouldn't because I see G in here all the time. There will be a, damn it, oh, it went away. Oh, I hate how that happens. It was something about the consultant toolkit. Oh, let me see if I can find, oh man, where did that go? It was something about the consultant toolkit, and I don't think if there's an easy way for me to go back and see what was recently shown. Dang. Okay, so G. Donfrio, ask that again, and then whenever you do it, keep it on your soundboard. Oh, that would be really funny. Ask it again, and I'll go in and check and see whatever it was, because it was something about one internal DBMS, and I didn't really see what it was fast enough. So, oh, wow. Coyote says, what has presenting online changed about how you arrange slides? I have been presenting online for over 20 years, so it's not as much of a surprise for me, because when I used to work in the hotel industry, we would use, some of you are going to be really old and you're going to remember this, PC Anywhere. PC Anywhere was this system from, I think it was originally Norton and then Symantec bought it, where you could share people's screens back and forth. It wasn't really for group broadcasting, but I would do training sessions with our accountants. I worked for a hotel company. Would do training sessions and I would walk through things. So I've been doing it for over 20 years, so I was already used to it. So it hasn't really changed anything there. I'll tell you what though. A lot of people, no, G. Donfrio, no, I won't do that. That's because it's cheap. I mean, it's really, it's like $500 a year. That's not bad. It's totally cool. So it didn't really change anything about the way that I present, but I'll tell you that what people are really struggling with now, when you see presenters who are used to presenting in real life, and they're starting to present back for the first time now online. The thing that hits people so hard is not being able to see the audience. When you present in person, it's really easy to see whether someone is keeping up or whether they've lost it, whether you've lost them in terms of what their skill level is, they don't understand a point, things like that. So that they're really struggling with not being able to see whether they should go deeper on a point or whether they should ask more questions. So the thing that makes a world of difference for me, I love having your chat on the screen. And I do this same thing in my private training classes. The Slack channel that we use shows up on the screen and people can ask questions. I take polls all the time. I'll ask people questions like, okay, what should I do next? Because I want to make sure that they're learning whatever it was that I just got done covering. Also, I like that, like in here, y'all can laugh at things, you can cheer, use emojis, whatever. So for me, that's the thing that makes a world of difference, is being able to see your feedback. And presenters who haven't learned that yet, I've tried to teach as many people as I can. Hey, get the audience involved, use something to show their chat on screen. The more that you can do that, the more comfortable it is to present online. Because it's also hard. No one wants to say online, like, hey, I didn't understand what the hell you just said. Whereas in person, it's really obvious where you can see them just go, oh. So it's a tricky thing. Next up, let's see here. Albert N says, what are the different advantages and disadvantages between an index with multiple columns and an index with columns as includes? I covered that in my Fundamentals of Index Tuning class. Fundamentals of Index Tuning is just $95 for the recordings. It's an entire all-day long class that teaches you how to choose which column should go first in an index, which column should go next in the includes. You know, and I should show you though, you can learn a lot of that in my free, not everything I teach in the fundamentals class, but the things to answer your question are actually in my free How to Think Like an Engine class. If I search for Brent Ozar, How to Think Like the Engine, there is a totally free course over there at How to Think Like the SQL Server Engine. It's available in video form as well as in blog post form. So whether you prefer to read that stuff or whether you prefer to watch it in videos, I've got something for you there, absolutely totally for free. Lots of past versions of it available on YouTube too. It's the course that I really believe everyone should start their database experience with, so I make it totally free out there. All right, next up, let's see here. Next up, Masut says, our ERP does, oh, let me move this thing around. I got the wrong damn screen up. There we go. Masut says, our ERP does a lot of where 1 equals 2 queries. Where 1 equals 2. So what they're doing is they're getting the shape of the result set. There are no rows where 1 equals 2. So SQL Server doesn't even look at any tables to answer that query. If you look at the execution plan will just have a constant scan in it and nothing else. So all SQL Server has to do is look at the data types to understand to return to no rows. But you don't have to worry about performance tuning queries like that because they're not your biggest performance problem. Let's see here. Go down a couple. Let's see. Scott says, hi Brent, what are the safest ways to upgrade? I never upgrade. Never, full stop. Never, ever, ever, ever upgrade SQL Server. Period, full stop. I will always, always, always go build a brand new SQL Server because I have to do the testing over there. I got to make sure that it actually works. Your query behaviors will change. So you said it's a large and on the SAN. Never, ever, ever use the word large. Give a number. Because see, for the rest of your life, you're always going to be working with databases that you think are large. You're always going to work for larger and larger companies with larger and larger databases. So whatever database you work with will always seem large. It isn't necessarily large. My iPad has 1 terabyte of flash storage. My laptop, 2 terabytes of flash storage. And I know people go, oh, I have this big database. And I'm like, okay, how large is it? 500 gigs? I'm like, that's not large. That's tiny. You should be able to go just buy an SSD and just do your testing over there. Next up, Masud says the problem is it scans a column store index if it exists. There's something else we're not seeing in the query, and unfortunately I would need to see the query in order to troubleshoot that. That's where my consulting comes in. For a low, low price of $69.95, I will go consult for you and go solve questions like that. I was leaning in only to fix a light. I wasn't looking like at my head or whatever. Judon Frio says, I can't wait to see you teach on Postgres. I never will. Never, ever, full stop. And it's not because I don't believe in it. It's an awesome platform and tool. It's just that I don't want to teach that. I'm not an expert in it. I'm a consumer in it, but I'm not an expert in it. Next up, Nasir asks a great question. How do I run a stored procedure in async mode? No service broker, please. So this is a great question to post at DB. I'm going to change my camera white balance too. It looks like I'm reaching around and hugging you. That's not really what I'm doing. It's a great question to ask at dba.stackexchange.com. I'm going to give you an answer, but I think you should still ask this question at dba.stackexchange.com because someone's going to give you a better answer than the one I'm about to give you. I'm going to give you a really bad answer, which is what you could do is create a SQL Server agent job. Yep, exactly. You got it. Bingo. Create a SQL Server agent job that'll go and run it once and then delete itself. It is a terrible answer, but it works. It's a real pain in the rear to go set up, but I have done that a few times in my dark and sordid past. Error handling sucks, permissions suck, but if you absolutely had to do it, that would be one way to do it. SSIS, I don't know of a way to create an SSIS package dynamically quickly just to run one stored procedure and schedule it. If you were going to go build a whole app or something, then it would probably make sense. But let's see. Damien says, over on YouTube, I'm implementing some temporal tables for the first time in a new piece of work. Do you have any tips, advice, or lookouts? Yes. Search for Vicky Harp. Let's go do it. So Vicky Harp temporal tables. If you search for Vicky Harp, she now works for Microsoft, but she used to work for Idera, and she did a lot of presentations at SQL Saturdays. You can go watch her past presentations and go download the material. She has a ton of quick getting started type stuff for temporal tables. You won't see a lot of good training out there on temporal tables. It's not because the feature sucks. The feature's actually really cool. It just has a couple of big gotchas, and Vicky explains them. For some folks, that's a showstopper for adoption. But I don't have any danger things where I'm like, oh my God, you can't do it. It's fine. It's totally okay. But just go through and watch Vicky's information there. So let's give a quick shout out over to the sponsor this week. So the sponsor this week is Idera. Idera is doing a one-day webcast called Idera Live. That's this Wednesday. You can go sign up for it over at brentozar.com/go/Idera Live. Totally free day of webcast training. The kinds of people like you who sign up for start watching YouTube webcasts at 6:46 a.m. Pacific on a Sunday are probably the kinds of people who will enjoy projects like that. Sudarshan, you don't have to keep asking the same question over and over again. It's like you're a 5-year-old and you're talking to your mom. Mom, why is the sky blue? Why? Why are chickens white? Why did the chicken cross the road, Mom? Mom, why did the chicken... That's a quick way to get yourself slapped and make sure that you don't get your weekly allowance. So, let's come back over here. Surly Dev is like, my God, I can't believe I moderate this channel. So next up, Jesus says, how do you determine how many SQL instances to install in a server? Instances, I generally only go one. If I need a separate instance, each time I need another instance, I'll go install another VM, a different server, etc. Multiple instances is a giant pain in the rear to go deal with performance troubleshooting, because you never know if the reason why you're slow is something that's happening on a different SQL server. How many databases fit into one instance? For me, it comes down to what the business says for recovery time. If the business says we've got to be able to restore this server in the event, or all the databases on this server, we got to be able to restore them all within, say, 1 hour when all hell breaks loose, then it's how much data can I restore within the span of 1 hour. So it's going to depend on how large the databases are, how long the times they take, how fast you tune your backups and restores. I have clients running 10, 12,000 databases per instance. Those aren't good times, they're bad times. But sometimes if you have, say, each client inside its own database, that's a valid way of doing things. Next up, wow, a lot of y'all are into ETL tools today. So same thing here, ETL tools, SSIS, Azure Data Factory. They do extract, transform, and load. Totally great ways of accomplishing that task. Oh, wow. So Renegade says, with large availability group databases, and remember, we're never going to use the term large again as long as we live, unless you're talking about something that involves your personal area. You really shouldn't be telling people that that's large. That's not large either. You just haven't seen other people's. I say that because I've seen surly devs. Oh my God, it's huge. I'm just joking. Renegade says, sorry, large-ish. With large, so, you know, in order to see too, so those of you, what you think your largest database is, go put it in chat. In chat, go tell me what you think your largest database is in terms of size. And I'm not going to make fun of it. This isn't about me making fun of it. This is so that you all can see what each other say, what your large databases are, so that you can get a feel for what the answers are like out there. This isn't a size comparison like you're going to show off, but just so that you can go see what large is to other people. And I'm going to keep talking while you talk through that. So now, the question was, do I prefer local NVMe storage or do I prefer like shared storage? For me, in the cloud, I'm all about NVMe if my recovery time objective will allow it. If people will be tolerant of that thing disappearing when the host goes down. Classic example, I had a client just recently with a 2 terabyte database, and when we got down to brass tacks, they were willing to be down for a day if they had to, in order to save a ton of money. So in that case, we went with local NVMe because it's so fast and cheap. Another client that I work with has a 300 gig database. They have near zero RPO and RTO, and they insist on shared storage, even though it's crappy and slow. So it just all comes down to that. Next up, Teenwag says, I had a query that joined 13 tables with only a few thousand rows. Join tables are indexed, remove a do you know what is likely to be happening? Unfortunately, I can't really troubleshoot queries. My fault for showing that up on the screen. I can't troubleshoot queries without seeing the plan, unfortunately. Next up, oh, wow. Giano Frio says, I'm going to be the first time in my life a database administrator or a database consultant. Suggestions. Oh, man. For me, it boils down to two really important things. Number one, know who's paying you. In project terms, this is often called a sponsor. A sponsor is someone who is your champion, who's going to go in and see this. They're the reason that you're on this project. They have the authority to make sure that you get paid. They will be your cheerleader internally. You want to build a relationship with whoever is your sponsor. That's the first thing. And then second, understand what they need. Understand what they're bringing you in for. Because often when you're a consultant, there's going to be a sponsor, and that person may not reach out to you and ask what, they're going to assume that you know what they need, and you're going to find all kinds of other people who love to talk, and they're going to think that they can get free labor out of you. Hey, buddy, pal, can you come in here and help me fill out this Excel spreadsheet? When in reality, they're not your sponsor, and they have nothing to do with why you're there at the company. So know who your sponsor is and know what they need done. And sometimes sometimes what they need done isn't necessarily what the contract was for. Sometimes you have to be flexible and go, okay, it turns out that you want me here for something else. Let me go do that other thing instead. But focus on what your sponsor wants and how to make them happy. I'm not saying be like kiss their rear or anything like that. I mean, just understand who they are, who your real customer is, and they'll make sure that you get taken care of. I say that because I'm good friends with a couple of my customers, not very many. There's maybe 2 of my customers that have my phone number, or I talk to on Instagram, things like that. And it's not because I want to get paid or anything like that. I'm doing fine company-wise, but my wife keeps laughing at your voice. Hey, buddy. Duh. Oh, Kurt says, just because it happens to be up, I'll answer it. Kurt says, could you share the make and model specs of your laptop? I run an Apple MacBook Pro. I just tend to, every time they bring a new MacBook Pro out, I buy the biggest, fastest one that they have. Just whatever all the specs are, I just go get that, which sounds like I'm being like a drama queen. But the thing is, Apple laptops have a great resale value. So usually if I spend $5,000 on the laptop, a year or 2 later, when they bring out a newer one, I can sell the old one for $4,000. They hold a lot of their value, unlike Windows laptops, which is as soon as you take them out of the package, they've lost all their value. So if it only costs me $1,000 a year, you think of it as $100 a month in order to run the best, fastest, hugest Apple laptop that they have. I tend to not get the largest. He says, I'm joking. He's joking about this. Exactly. I'm joking about both. That's true too. So yeah, and I am right about I am a drama queen, but it has nothing to do with the size of the laptop. I use it, David. Yes, I use it every day. Use it every day because it works with Postgres, so I'm a big fan of that. Next up, let's see here. Delete a few things. Pythor says, I'm a developer DBA and I don't have SA rights on my main database. How useful would SPBlitz be for me with my limited permissions? What you do is you go to your sysadmins and you show them those scripts, and then you say, hey, can I run these in production? What they can do, if you read the documentation on SPBlitz, Blitz First, etc., I give you instructions to install them with a certificate, and then they can sign the certificate with sysadmin permissions. That way, the proc has sysadmin permissions, but you don't. So that way, anytime you run the proc, it has all the permissions that it needs, even though you don't. So then that way, it's much safer. They're actually not going to read the contents of my stored procs either. I could put drop database in there and they wouldn't know because the damn things are like 10,000 line long. Nobody has the time to read that stuff. Sue Paul says, another question, Brent. If the instance has 4 databases, how's the plan of each database stored in the buffer pool separately? Each database gets its own execution plans cached. Is there any way to restrict per database? Ooh. Not normally. Like if you go and ask this question out in public, most people are going to say no, but there is. What you could do if you were on Enterprise Edition is you could set up Resource Governor, which is an Enterprise Edition only feature. Set up different workload groups and resource pools for each database. Then you can run dbcc free proc cache with, I want to say it's a resource group. It's either a pool or a resource group, and then you can free just the one plan cache for just that one database. Now, there are lots of gotchas. It doesn't work with cross-database queries. It doesn't work when you have fully qualified database names and you're running from another database, but that's the creative answer to your question. Big Mike says, thanks for having the Q&A. You're welcome. This is the second to last Q&A. I have one scheduled for tomorrow, but then for the next couple of weekends, I'm actually teaching classes. So you won't see me in here doing open Q&A for the next couple of weekends. It's not that I don't love y'all. I just wanted to do a 3-month experiment and then go see how it worked with the weekend streams. Turns out that y'all love to ask questions, so that's kind of interesting too. Max says, do you know if AX Dynamics is running SQL Server in the back end? Yes, it is. Next question. More Cash says, good morning, Brent. I'm new to database administration, DBA work. Welcome. I am new to DBA work. How do you resolve data log and Tempdb drives filling up? Get larger drives? Okay. Next question. So no, seriously, a lot of times when I run into this, people are running it on like a 100 gig drive. Storage isn't that expensive these days. The first thing that I would do is just go make sure, are we talking about something less than a terabyte? If it's less than a terabyte, just go add more storage to it. Hey, Yummy, stop asking the same question. We saw it the first time. It is in the queue. Goodbye. You are the weakest link. That's a quick way to make sure I don't answer your question. Next up, let's see here. Random Name says, what, if any, are the use cases for using a sequence instead of an identity? When you have an application that needs to do parent-child, let's say order and order details. So like it's going to go insert 100 orders and 10 line items for each order, and it wants to do them all at once in one transaction. To do that, it needs to know the identities for each of the orders because it's going to use those identities down in the order details. What your application can do then is say, go get me a block of 100 identities, sequences, 100 numbers from the sequence, and then it's going to go use those in the order details line. It's wonderful for applications like that. Next up, Keith says, should you really split Tempdb into multiple files? Yes. If so, do you follow the Microsoft recommendations? Yes. So that's an easy one there. Dolly says, do you want table partitioning to be part of database providers of Entity Framework Core? I would probably say no. Because it should be, table partitioning should be transparent to the front end. The front end should just be asking for give me these rows and insert these rows, delete these rows. It has nothing to do with how it structures, how EF structures its queries. So I can't imagine a valid use for it. I might be wrong. There might be one. I just can't imagine it offhand. Seems kind of odd to me there. Next up, Kevlar says, every time I read execution plans, I read them in the Brento voice. Hey, buddy, I got big ideas. Oh, that's true, too. For replication, that probably makes sense there as well. I like Dwayne's idea there. Over on YouTube, Shake asks, is always on really a high availability disaster recovery feature? When we patch the secondary and fail over, the data... So I'm not, you got a whole lot of words there, and I'm not really sure what the question is. I'm going to just go for the top one. Is always on really an HADR feature? Yes. Otherwise, try to boil down your question into something more manageable. I'm not quite sure what you're asking there. Oh. Huzaiva on YouTube says, do running queries partially in a sequence container in SSIS improve performance? I have no idea, but I'll tell you who I do know who would know. Andy Leonard. If you search for SSIS Andy Leonard, Andy is a super friendly guy. He's out on Twitch. He's got blogs, books, the whole 9 yards. And you can find his contact info there. He also does training classes on SSIS. He would be the person that I would go learn from if I was going to go learn SSIS. Really nice guy. Next up we have Dtovi. Bonus points for the friend note there. A friend is working on a stupid wide table with a stupid large number of indexes. It seems to break SPBlitz index. Is there an easy way to debug it? Yeah, run SPBlitz index has a debug parameter. Run it with debug equals 1, and that'll dump out the dynamic SQL that SPBlitz index is using. Also, make sure you're on the latest dev version. Not the latest production version, the latest dev build of SPBlitz index, because we get all kinds of new things inside there. There are things that were broken in last month's SPBlitz index, specifically about really wide tables. So always make sure whenever you're hitting a bug, go try the dev version first. Ian says, did you ever use the web server built into SQL Server? I'll tell you, I was tempted to. When that came out, I was tempted to because I was building a project where the main tool that I used at the time was SQL Server, and I needed to do a really quick skunkworks kind of thing, but I never did build it because I went into it and I was like, oh, this is kind of janky. I don't really want to use this. Zaki says, is it possible to subscribe on Twitch? No, I dropped out of the affiliate and partner program because they don't allow you to simulcast on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. If you're going to do subscriptions, you have to only exclusively go on Twitch. And I'm like, I have too many viewers on YouTube, so I don't really want to go down that road. But thank you for offering to subscribe, though. Those of you who want to follow me on YouTube or Twitch, you can follow me, and then that way you get instant emails whenever I start broadcasting. Because I tend to broadcast at just random times whenever works for me rather than works for y'all, because I'm selfish and that's the way I roll. I have no idea. That's an answer. I'll do a few fast rounds of stuff that I don't know. I have no idea. Best to Google on that one. Let's see here. We'll close that one. Bala says, how do I monitor the performance of SQL Server and view how many users are connected? Search for Brent Ozar First Responder Kit, and I've got a whole series of scripts to help you do that and video tutorials to show you how to use them. So search for Brent Ozar First Responder Kit. Next up, Huzaifa says, your opinion on SQL Server's built-in maintenance plans. I'm in the minority here. Okay, great. I'm in the minority here in that I like maintenance plans. I know a lot of DBAs kind of hold grudges against maintenance plans. DBAs are like, they're not good enough. They're not strong enough. You should use something cooler. And they promote, rightfully so, as do I, Ola Hollengren's maintenance scripts. But let me show you something. So Ola Hollengren's maintenance scripts are on GitHub. My Bluetooth keyboard's got to wake up there. Ola Hollengren GitHub. And if I go look at the GitHub repository for this, here's his SQL Server maintenance solution, which is great. It's really cool. Highly recommend it. Take a look up there. There are 195 issues with it, and 20 people have contributed code, and this thing hasn't been updated lately. Maintenance plans, I'm sure, have some bugs. I'm positive that maintenance plans have bugs here and there. But if I'm going to have somebody who isn't a full-time database administrator go and do that, I'm probably going to give them maintenance plans because it's just easier to manage. Ola is okay. Ola is fine. I emailed him, talked to him. He's just been overwhelmed at work lately, all kinds of things to do, so he hasn't been able to do anything on the scripts lately. So. All right, so a quick shout out to this week's sponsor. This week's sponsor is Idera. They're doing a totally free YouTube webcast over at brentozar.com. Totally free YouTube webcast. I just looked at a YouTube comment and I was like, they're doing a totally free stream over at brentozar.com/go/Idera live on, I believe it's Wednesday, September the 16th. They have a whole day of free sessions for database administrators, developers, performance tuners, all that. You can go watch that over at brentozar.com/go/Idera live. Next up, let's see what we got next for our questions. Go over here. So a few fast rounds. I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea on that one. It's a good question. I just don't have any idea. But Balaji says, I didn't mean to replicate servers in AWS. We have 20 servers. Should I use? Oh, unfortunately, that like personally designing someone's high availability solution is kind of beyond what you would want to just take a Twitch or YouTube comment from. You would want to go and hire a consultant who does that kind of thing full time. I don't say that in order to sell my services. There are lots of consultants who do this for a living, but you don't want to make a half rear-ended guess on that and choose poorly and have it come back to hurt you for quite a while. Hey, Sue says, my friend is learning SQL Server database administration by himself. He was asking for configurations on buying a good laptop. Go to the Wirecutter. And search for the Wirecutter laptop recommendations, and they stay on top of that all the time. Just because all I buy is Apple gear, and it's not because I'm an elitist. I just use all Apple stuff. It's easier in their ecosystem for me. I've been using it since Windows Vista. You remember Windows Vista? Those of you who remember Windows Vista will understand why I switched. And I just haven't been able to come back. I see Windows 8 looks good, Windows 10 looks good, all those look... They don't really look good. They're chock full of adware. Are you kidding me? I tried that every now and then. They have ads for Candy Crush in an operating system that I paid for. You're going to show me ads for Candy Crush? Are you out of your mind? Okay, whatever. Next up, Dejan says, starting to feel old. Dejan says, I've got always on availability groups and an agent job. How do I configure to only run on a primary or secondary node? You have to create jobs on all the nodes, and then you have to put your own first step in the job that says, am I the primary for the databases that matter? So the thing is, it's not pre-installed on the enterprise grade builds. You can go buy the enterprise grade build, or I think they call it the N build now, and it doesn't come pre-installed, and you still get the freaking ads. So with always on availability groups, don't just say, am I the primary? Because you may have some databases that are the primary over here and some databases that are the primary over here. Even though you don't have that yet, you will in your career. It's just a matter of time. So write your scripts in a way that they take like a database name and then go check to see if they're the primary or the secondary, and then only run based on that. We'll do a few quick fire more here. Can I talk about project level deployment? No, I don't know anything about it, so that's a quick and easy answer there. Is it possible to connect SaaS services like HubSpot or Zendesk directly to SQL Server? Doing that would mean that you were exposing your SQL Server to the internet, which is what a lot of people will say is is a bad idea. If you wanted to do things like that, look at the tool Zapier. Zapier, Zapier. And Zapier has tools that will let you do that kind of thing. Like every time something happens with HubSpot, it'll automatically trigger something in SQL Server or vice versa. Yummy Tummy, I am now going to ban you from the channel because you have asked that question so many times, so we'll take care of that. Let's see, next up. This is Gorov says, any advice or tips if I want to start database administration on the SaaS side, SQL Server Analysis Services? No. When SQL Server Analysis Services came out, it looked really interesting, but it kept changing over the last few years. And for a while there, it didn't seem like Microsoft really had a vision. Or if they did, they were really distracted by squirrels, like the vision kept changing. And the people who I know who were doing a lot of SaaS work seem to be getting really frustrated. I am not saying that SaaS is bad. I don't know that I would want to bet my career on that particular tool, especially in the day and age of the cloud. Microsoft has really gotten focused on how do we move people to the cloud. If you wanted to do analysis services type work, I actually wouldn't do it in analysis services. I would go learn, forgive me that this is kind of funny. It's Azure Synapse Analytics, I believe is what they're calling it this week. So it's been, I can't even remember all these things that it's been. Parallel Data Warehouse, Azure SQL Data Warehouse, I forget the name they called it after that. Now it's like Azure Synapse Analytics. The product is baller. It's just phenomenal. Like I've just been nothing but impressed by the way that thing was architected under the hood. It can't get any market traction because they keep changing the damn name. I'm like, if you were trying to date someone, would you change your name every month? Hey, I find you really attractive. My name is Brent. I'll see you later. Hey, remember me? My name is Frank. What do you think? We go out someday. Hey, remember me? I'm Joe. You'd be like, what is wrong with you? That would immediately turn people off. So I don't understand why they think that that's going to work well. Next up, let's see here. Gianfrio says, I have a gigantic query with a 20 table join. I need to simplify, maybe temp tables. Sure. Next up, SQL database versus MongoDB. MongoDB is cool if you want to store documents, like you're going to store XML documents, for example, or JSON files, and it's not mission critical. Like you don't mind if you lose some data or the query results aren't perfectly accurate. So it's a much lower cost kind of thing, as opposed to SQL Server being at $2,000 a CPU core, $7,000 a CPU core for Enterprise Edition. So that really boils down to, if you're going to store data that you don't really care about and it's mostly in document format, MongoDB is a cheaper way to get the job done. Next up, Darren Davis says, if you want to be a consultant, you want to offer services where companies feel it's valuable, comparing it to open source is free. I'm not sure what you're saying there, because if you're saying that open source consultants make less money than SQL Server consulting, I would agree. Generally, the higher price the product is, the more the people make when they work on it. A Ferrari mechanic makes more per hour than a Chevy mechanic. So generally speaking, that's true. Next up, let's see here. Jackie, I didn't trust he knew what he was talking about because he didn't change the default font or file size in SQL Server. The default font size in SQL Server, that really makes me weird out. So here's what I used to do. When I was young and naive, I would go and change the font and the font size in my SQL servers in Management Studio. And then over time, as I was doing presentations, I kept getting the question of, why does your SSMS look like that? So I ended up sticking with the defaults now, and I usually just stick with the defaults because I want people to not ask questions about why does your Management Studio look that way, and does it itch? Next up, Zentio says, Brent, I recently ran a migration between two databases using triggers. And update statements on those tables. Are there better approaches? That's fair. Okay. No. Okay. I said but you know what? That's not terrible. And I've done similar things like that in the past. Let me tell you what the problems are with that approach. And I'm just going to close the screens behind me since the white balance is getting a little weird. So the problems with that approach are, as you deal with databases that have more and more tables in them, you're going to have a tougher and a tougher time dealing with all of the triggers that are going to be required and doing error handling inside those triggers. But if you only have a limited number of tables, it's not terrible. The other problem with it is if the second server drops offline, if for some reason it reboots or whatever, if you're doing triggers that directly insert across to linked servers, you're going to have a problem. I'm actually not going to do a bio break. I'm going to roll the whole way through till I was going to check and see when my car wash opened. Let me go looking when my car wash opens. Maps.google.com. Yeah, or the other ways to do it, look for, he says, good job, I have Bluetooth headphones. Really what you want to look for, it's funny that this keeps coming up, is ETL devices, or ETL tools, so extract, transform, and load tools that will keep databases in sync between two places. All right, let's go see when my car wash opens up, because I haven't had Helmut detailed since he came back. He opens at 8. Okay, so I'm probably going to do another 15 minutes worth of questions, and then I'll bail because I want to go get my car detailed. All right, next up, Zaki says, people seem to be moving to non-SQL databases such as MongoDB and Firebase. What are your thoughts on it? Money. SQL Server's chasing the Oracle market. They're trying to conquer people who are willing to spend $47,000 per core on licensing or $47,000 per CPU, whatever it is. Microsoft isn't really chasing people who are into free databases. It's not that the product won't work, it's just that if all you need is stuff that could be accomplished with free databases, then you should totally use free databases. And a lot of applications don't need the power of SQL Server, and that's totally okay. Like us, when we went and built SQL Constant Care, we didn't use SQL Server. We used Amazon Aurora Postgres because it's cheaper. Bless your heart, Surly. We used Postgres because it's cheaper. So there's no licensing costs, so it's a better option for us. Next up, YouTube random name says, should I use separate instances for development environments where they need different versions of SQL Server? I'm still a hard no. Go give them different virtual machines for each build. Development edition is free anyway. Just go spin up a different bunch of VMs. Next up, More Cash asks, what do you look for in a code review? You know what? Oh, that's right. I forgot. Some people actually review their code before it goes live. Oh, man, I wish I lived in one of those worlds. Wouldn't that be awesome? Oh, I bet it's happy. I bet people make less mistakes. I bet other people look at the code. Oh, that would be a magical world. I don't seem to live in that world, though. God, dagnabbit. I'll tell you what I would look for, because I don't do these. Nobody wants to pay me consulting money to go do a code review, but I'll tell you what I do look for. Number one thing that I look for is hard-coded stuff, server names, IP addresses, etc. Second thing that I'll look for is things that will take your SQL Server down. Not even necessarily take the server down, but lock tables. So trying to alter a table and add a bunch of stuff in real time inside a transaction. I'm looking for things that will take the server down. So that's the big stuff that I look for. Next up, Kakad says, what's the maximum size that SQL Server can handle these days? Talking about on-premises ones. The largest clients that I have tend to be 80 to 100 terabytes worth of data in one SQL Server. I have heard there's a person, Michelle Ufford, who used to work for GoDaddy and then Netflix. Michelle talked about a SQL Server that she had that had a petabyte of data on it. So that's 10 times 100 terabytes. So that gives you a rough idea there. Good. D. Tovey, thanks for plugging that because I couldn't remember what it was at the time. OpsServer is Stack Exchange's open source SQL Server monitoring tool, and it monitors a lot more than just SQL Server. It monitors all kinds of other stuff. If I remember right, Redis and IIS and probably some other stuff as well. We don't shame here. Next up, Jarrett says, we're seeing high temp table usage with forwarded fetches. Would it be better to show the execution plan with and without using the temp table? So I want to know what the biggest problem is in the query plan, and I bet it's not forwarded fetches. Like, I would have to analyze the query plan to see what the big problems were, and it's beyond the scope of what I can guess from that. My guess is that I would I would take my Fundamentals of Query Tuning class, Brent Ozar's Fundamentals of Query Tuning, where for $95 you can learn how to tune your queries and find the most slow part of the query, which part you should look at and which experiments you should start to make there. So there we go. Howard says, when you store binary data docs like the PDFs, photos, etc., do you recommend them all in one table? Or I don't want them in SQL Server. SQL Server at $2,000 a core for Standard Edition, $7,000 a core for Enterprise Edition. That is one heck of an expensive file server. There's a great place to put files. It's called you may have heard of this, a file server. So a file server is really good at file backups and file replications and all that. And the best thing about file servers is that they cost, carry the 1, 0. So I'm all about that. Next up here. Yummy Tummy says 5 culprits to look at in an execution plan. For that, check out my Fundamentals of Query Tuning course. Richard on YouTube says, which features of SQL Server do you think are the least used that should be widely used? Oh, that's a great question. I'm going to say number 1 is probably Query Store. I have a hard time I used to try and recommend it across the board, and like SpBlitz, I would hammer on people to go turn on Query Store. We tried it in Constant Care too. I can see why a lot of people don't turn it on because it has a tendency to take your server down if you have certain kinds of workloads. However, most people don't have those kinds of workloads. So that is probably the one that I think is the most useful. I'd probably start there. RCSI, Read Committed Snapshot Isolation. RCSI is fantastic. I think every database should start with RCSI turned on. And they do in Azure SQLDB, and you can't even turn it off. So that's a good one there as well. Filtered indexes isn't that feature to me because it's so hard to get SQL Server to use them whenever you have parameterized queries. Partitioning, not no, but hell no. I would be like most of the time when I see people using partitioning, it's making their queries slower instead of faster because SQL Server's not doing any partition elimination because they don't have the partitioning columns inside their where clause. Renegade says, what's the biggest heap table that you've seen? I'm going to say like 20, 30 terabytes because I'm just remember, if I can't remember, it's like 10, 20, 30 terabytes somewhere in there. Microsoft's Fast Track Data Warehouse Reference Architecture used to, before column store indexes, they used to recommend that you store your fact tables in heaps. And you still can if you use older versions of SQL Server. But so back then, it was real popular for fact tables. Kurt says, suggestions on how to learn SAS, just go pick up a book from Amazon or your favorite bookseller, just because SAS hasn't really changed that much in the last 3, 4, 5 years. So any book from the last 3, 4, 5 years should be vaguely okay. The thing that I get nervous about is there's all this stuff between tabular and this other, I don't even remember all the keywords in SSAS. And Microsoft looked like they kept trying to find the right gear in the gear shifter. They kept trying to change their strategy. So just get something that's recent, like the last 3, 4 years. Don't go with something older than that. Ian says, what is the best method for refactoring database objects? The main reason would be cleaning up some bad naming conventions. Do not do that. Don't do that. Because let me pretend like I'm your manager. So, Ian, you've been hard at work the last 3, 4 months. What have you been doing that makes you eligible for a raise around here? Now I'll take your part. Well, boss, I changed a bunch of code so that I could change some names inside of it. I'm sorry, you what? Yeah, the names were really bad, so I went ahead and redid all our code. It's got better names now. Does it run any faster? Is it any more scalable? No. Ian, not only are you not going to get a raise, I'm going to fire you. There's the door. So don't go do that. Go focus on things that end users want. Don't focus on like polishing your shoes there. Lauren says, where can I get the script to get the top 10 resource consumers sorted by CPU? Search for SPBlitz cache. SPBlitz cache, and that is the tool for you. And I've got videos on how to use it as well. David asked a funny question. How do you pronounce SQL or SQL? If you search for Bill Gates SQL Server ad, Bill Gates SQL Server ad, there's a video that he did back like 20, 30 years ago, 20, 25 years ago. And in this one ad, he pronounces it both ways. He says both SQL and SQL. So I'm like, that's like your big clue there. Jesus says, is it possible to have total CPU time less than elapsed time when I'm going parallel? Yes. Blocking. Say that your query is going to go parallel across 4 cores, but when it starts up, it's blocked for a minute. You're going to have a minute worth of elapsed time even when you're not using CPU. So that's how elapsed time can be high. That's a really easy way. There are lots of other ways it can do it. Next up, YouTube Dolly says, I'm asking for a friend, what do you think about graph performance impacts when it's used to get data from SQL Server? A poor musician blames their instruments. A good musician can make the world's crappiest guitar sound amazing. A bad musician, doesn't matter if you give him a perfectly aged Gibson guitar, he can't make it sound worth a damn. Like if you put one in my hands, it's going to sound like a cat trying to fight his way out of a paper bag. I'm less worried about the language. I'm much more worried about the skill of the person using that language. Next up, Steve says, what advice can you give for tuning a query that is so slow you can't realistically wait for an actual execution plan? Live query plans. Use live query plans and you can see the data flowing through the execution plan. The live query plan starts right away as the query starts. So that way you can watch to see where it's spending its time and you can start working there. And you'll see estimates versus actuals as it's moving through the plans. As I discuss in my Mastering Query Tuning class, available now at servers near you. Next up, let's see here. Experience the Ink asked and then waited patiently, bless his heart. What is your proposed way of rebuilding indexes automatically for query optimization? That's a really great question. The answer that I would give you is go Google for my name and index rebuild or index defrag. And I've got a video out there saying why defragmenting your indexes isn't helping. And I explain why index rebuilds aren't really the thing that's making your SQL Server slow. In some edge cases they are, but it's super rare. And usually what's happening there is parameter sniffing and people are really just freeing that plan from the cache. Next up, Dank says, why doesn't SQL Server allow you to create a computed column based on another computed column? Seems like a pointless limitation. Well, it's really like, you know how that time that you were in kindergarten and you tried to leave the house and you tried to put on your Superman costume over on top of your Batman costume and your mom was like, how about we just wear one costume at a time today? It's a lot like that. Hopefully that explains that one. Next up, I use JetBrains DataGrip for writing SQL queries, nothing complex. I feel it's much better than Management Studio for writing queries. Okay. Cool. Next up, beginner questions. What are the reasons that triggers... I should also say I tried DataGrip. I couldn't stand it. I just could not stand it. Okay, Tired says, and it's nothing bad against it. If it works for you, great. It's like that, your favorite kind of porn. I'm not going to judge. Mine's probably different than yours, but that's cool. You can have your own, and that's okay. Okay, Tired says, beginner questions. What? I know, right? This is going to be the one my mom was watching. Beginner questions. What are the reasons that triggers are considered bad? The most often one is that people will put all kinds of code inside the trigger, and they'll wonder why their inserts, updates, and deletes are slow. The second most common one is that people will not write their trigger to handle multiple rows at the same time. So those are the most common ones. To me, I don't have a problem with triggers. I think they're okay for certain circumstances. The problem is that people just stack in code. They're like, every time there's an insert, watch this. I'm going to go call a web service, and I'm going to write a file to disk, and I'm going to go take a lock over here, and I'm going to do the whole thing inside a transaction, and I'm not going to have any error handling at all. And then they treat it like it's a full-blown application. Like application code belongs in an application. Jiminy says, why use SQL Server over Postgres? Oh, that's a great question. And I'm just going to rattle off some of my favorites. And I use both. I use both about 50% of the time each way. So the things that I miss when I'm in Postgres as opposed to SQL Server, index usage DMVs, like the ability to automatically get a list of which indexes I wish I could have, which indexes I need to tweak. Plan cache DMVs, the ability to monitor which queries are the most resource intensive, to get an execution plan that's repeatable over time. Auditing, like enterprise grade auditing built in so you can track for like HIPAA compliance purposes, PCI SOX, whatever, which queries are reading which data, which users are seeing which data, and so forth. Encryption, always on availability groups for high availability, failover clustering. These are things that are much more challenging to do over in Postgres. Query parallelism repeatedly throughout lots of parts of the query plan, something that is also SQL Server is very good at and Postgres kind of struggles a little bit with. So that's just a quick rundown of times when that tool makes more sense. Yummy Tummy says max database size for Azure SQL Database. If only there was some kind of way you could search the internet to find answers for questions like that. Instead, you're just typing things randomly into a YouTube chat box, hoping that I'm going to answer your question. Sadly, I will not. Next up. Ian says, is SQL Server message queuing ever used to transfer data? Yes, I personally think it's a really bad idea. I'm not a fan of Service Broker because SQL Server is a really expensive place to do queuing. It's $2,000 a core for standard, $7,000 a core for enterprise. If you're up in the cloud, you should be using queuing services up in the cloud. I'm constantly stunned by how cheap queuing services are, like Amazon's SQS. It's like $1 per billion messages. I mean, it's just absolutely insane, and it's so much more reliable than SQL Server Service Broker. You don't have to deal with clustering or any of that stuff. So is it used? Yes. Do I think that it should be used today? Probably not. The place where I see it used is that someone has the SQL Server hammer and they bang the SQL Server hammer on every, we need to store files, I'll get the SQL Server hammer. We need to do queuing, I'll get the SQL Server hammer. And I'm like, hey, there are other tools in the toolbox. Next up, let's see here. VTOL Freak. Well, it's been a while since I've seen you. I mean, you might have been in here. I just haven't seen the chat messages in a while. VTOL Freak says, I used to deliver and deploy rollback scripts for my code changes. After they broke the database for the nth time, I gave up. What do you think about deploying schema changes from Visual Studio? So I'm lucky in that I don't do development that often. Like I don't have to manage changes. I do have to slide in here and go block, Malika room, whatever. I don't have to manage changes that often. The tool that most people seem to be excited about is like Redgate's tools for schema deploy or version control type things. I just don't get those involved with those. All right, there's still more questions in, and I think people would probably continue throwing questions in altogether, but I'm going to go ahead and pull the plug here because I'm going to go get my car detailed. So thanks everybody for popping in and asking questions. I will be here same time tomorrow, and I'll pick up again there. I won't have the same queue of questions. We'll end up starting fresh again on the question list. A quick shout out. to this week's sponsor. So Idera brought you this week's webcast. They're doing a totally free day of webcasts over at brentozar.com/go/Idera live. So you can go in there and go sign up for that and go have yourself some fun this week on September the 16th. Thanks, everybody, and I will see y'all next time. Adios.